In today's video, 6 additional defendants were just charged in the ongoing Minnesota Somali fraud scam, bringing the total to over 90 plus people, with an overwhelming majority coming from the Somali community. The assistant U.S. attorney investigating the Somali fraud in Minnesota says as much as $18 billion could have been stolen from taxpayers. But Ilhan Omar is still going on TV pretending there isn't a problem. As always, guys, best way to show your support is by smashing that thumbs up, hitting that subscribe, and sharing this video. That way more people see what's really going on. So today the feds announced 6 more people charged, and 1 person pled guilty in the ongoing Minnesota fraud wave. The DOJ is now talking about fraud across multiple Minnesota programs: nutrition, autism services, housing services. And now they're saying there's an additional program under investigation too, the Integrated Community Service Program. Now, I already spoke about the Feeding Our Future scam. That's the case centered on the pandemic era meal programs. Somali businesses and nonprofits were inflating numbers, claiming they were feeding huge amounts of kids as a way to build the government for reimbursements, right? And then, we have the autism program fraud, where they needed kids with autism to defraud and steal from taxpayers. But since they didn't have enough real kids with autism, they recruited willing parents with families, the bigger the better, to falsely diagnose their kids with having autism, because the more clients and the worse the case, the more money they could bring in. And the parents receive kickbacks ranging from $300 to $1,500 per child per month. Even the parents were scamming the scammers, threatening to go to a different clinic if they wouldn't pay the parent more money. And then there is the Housing Stabilization Service fraud scheme, a program meant to help that was turned into a hustle. The Housing Stabilization Scheme centered on a Medicaid program that was supposed to help vulnerable people, including individuals with disabilities and seniors, find and keep stable housing, right? But according to federal prosecutors, providers billed Medicaid for services that were exaggerated, never provided, or just completely fabricated. And with all of that going on, you have their representative Ilhan Omar going on television, pretending that there's nothing to see here, when clearly there is a issue, there is a problem going on, a serious problem.
No, we are doctors, we are teachers, we are entrepreneurs, and we are elected representatives of our state. And so these vile comments and this sort of creepy obsession that that he has on me and Somali Americans really is dangerous, and it's beneath the office of the presidency.
Ilhan Omar wants to pretend nothing is going on, but at the same time, the state of Minnesota is actively pausing additional programs because investigators believe the fraud is running so rampant. I mean, that's what happens when the federal government gets involved, and now they actually have some oversight. States just don't freeze programs unless something is seriously wrong. That's just the reality of the situation. I mean, come on now. If this was just a few isolated incidents, it wouldn't be about statewide pauses, audits, and federal task force expanding their reach. That's why this matters, and that's why this story hasn't gone away. Take a listen.
Prosecutors also announced new charges against a provider of autism treatment services and a guilty plea for another. WCCO found those companies actually billed the state for millions more than they were actually approved for. Caroline Cummings is working on that part of the story. What did you find, Caroline?
Well, Frank, WCCO News obtained data of how much all of the autism providers billed all DHS programs over the last several years, and we found that the state often denied requests for payment of services. From 2018 through 2025, autism providers in total billed $1.6 billion, but they were only approved for about 56% of those claims. Smart Therapy Center in Minneapolis is where prosecutors say Asha Farhan Hassan carried out a scheme to defraud the state's Early Intensive Development and Behavior Intervention, or EIDBI, program for $14 million. On Thursday in federal court, she pled guilty.
She sent at least hundreds of thousands of dollars to Kenya, which were used to purchase real estate.
But she tried to get even more money from state programs, according to state records obtained by WCCO News. For example, last year, Smart Therapy charged $7.5 $6.6 million for work it claimed to be doing treating children with autism, but the state paid only a fraction of that, $3.4 million. Investigators have said suspicious billing patterns can tip them off to fraud. Is that a red flag, that they're billing so much more than the state's actually reimbursing them for?
I would say there's lots of different red flags out there. I mean, we are using data analytics in new ways, right? So as we get our data analytics up and running, we're looking at payment outliers or any red flags. So our work continues on that front.
On Thursday, federal prosecutors charged another autism provider with wire fraud. At the center of that case is Star Autism Center, LLC.
Mr. Youssef, like others involved in the autism scheme, paid kickbacks to parents to have their children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and enrolled to receive EIDBI services at his autism center.
State records show Star Autism Center billed Medicaid programs for 2 years, and the state denied $1.2 million in claims for services during that time. I asked Joe Thompson, the prosecutor, how often he estimates people who are committing fraud are billing multiple programs across the state to get as much money as they can. He said most individuals they investigate and charge have multiple health care companies, and that each, quote, seems to be created to bill a specific Medicaid program. Frank.
It's pretty brazen, Caroline. All right. Thank you.
The fraud in Minnesota is mind-blowing. It's far beyond just incompetence at this point. This is just flat out corruption. The only question is, will those elected officials who were involved and who knowingly and who willingly decided to look the other way, will they be able to shield themselves enough and distance themselves enough in order to not be caught with enough evidence? That's the only question at this point. Because now that the U.S. Assistant Attorney General is investigating this case, there are estimates that 18 billion, I said that with a B, billion taxpayer dollars were stolen through these various different programs in the state of Minnesota. Take a listen.
I spoke in the fall about the iceberg I saw ahead. Something's fraud that's much larger than what's been visible to the public. When I said that, it wasn't hyperbole or rhetoric, it was a warning. And today I want to talk and I want to show here a sense of what that iceberg looks like, because I think people deserve to know what that is and how big this problem is, because we can't solve the problem until we grapple with the size of it. So the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services pulled the claims data for these 14 programs dating back to 2018. And those 14 programs in Minnesota have cost $18 billion since 2018, and more than $3.5 billion in 2024 alone. So that's a sense of the magnitude of the problem. These are the 14 Medicaid programs, which is just a part of Medicaid, these waivered services that have been flagged as having issues with program integrity and fraud. Now, I'm sure everyone is wondering how much of this $18 billion was fraud. It's not the $1 million question, that's the $18 billion question. The answer is far too much, and the task ahead of all of us is not only figuring out how much of that money was fraud, because we know a significant amount was, but figuring out how to put an end to the fraud in our state and get control of it.
Listen, the only way you stop something like this from happening again is you lock up the people who have the power, the politicians, the elected officials. If you don't do that, then you're just going to continue to see the same thing occur over and over again, because the people who have the power, they'll just continue to use those who want access to money, who want access to earning a quick buck, and are willing to take that level of risk, thinking that they are insulated from danger because they have elected officials or people who have a certain amount of power above them. They think they're insulated. And so unless you're willing to do something about that part of it, then this will happen again sometime in the future, once people let their guard down again and get to relax and think that the coast is clear. Situations like this are not able to occur and go on for this long and go to this level of fraud unless you have large groups of people who are complicit in the act, but also people who do figure out what's going on because they're not in a position really to actually stop it, they may just be able to see it and make those who can stop it aware of it. They get silenced. And we know that happened because there were the whistleblowers who were coming out and they were talking about how they saw the warning signs and they alerted the people in the positions of power. They went to Tim Walz, they went to the elected officials, they went to the Democrat leaders, and they were told to, hey, don't mess with that community over there because we don't want to come off as racist by judging them and saying they're doing something illegal. But we're also not going to bother looking into it either, which makes absolutely no sense. This next clip is one of those whistleblowers. This is Alpha News, actually, who've been doing some coverage of this story, speaking to one of those alleged whistleblowers about what she experienced on the job and how she noticed some clear and evident things and how it just went ignored when she did bring it up. Take a listen.
More and more whistleblowers are coming forward with reports and information about rampant fraud in Minnesota. One of them has been trying to sound the alarm for years, only to be ignored while millions of taxpayer dollars disappeared. More about her story and the real victims next. We're joined today by a would-be whistleblower, someone who tried to call attention to fraud in Minnesota but was ignored. She still works in county government and wanted to speak out. But unfortunately, we do live in a world where cancel culture, doxing, violent threats have all become too common. So she asked us to help protect her identity. We're going to call her Susan. Thank you, Susan, for reaching out and for speaking with us today.
Yeah, of course.
I want to first focus on Minnesota's Housing Stabilization Services. It's the HSS program funded by Medicaid and administered by the Minnesota Department of Human Services. As you know, the program was officially shut down on October 31st after it was said to be just riddled with fraud. You saw all of this up close. You tried reporting it for years. What have you seen for yourself?
So what I witnessed first, and there were a lot of red flags. So I would go out to my clients' homes to be there and help them kind of navigate and go through this. And we would have a meet and greet where the service agreement / contract would be signed, and the so-called provider for the service would say, we will see you weekly. We will be emailing weekly. We will be looking for housing together weekly. As soon as we'd sign the contracts and they would leave, we would never hear from them again. I would send multiple emails, voicemails, leave voicemails for supervisors, gone, nothing. And then I would say 2 months later, we would find out that that person is gone or this place is gone. They're no longer there. But meanwhile, the whole few months, there were 0 services provided. Then we'd start the process all over again with a new person coming out. You know, usually it's always someone in their 20s, probably a very entry-level position, when we have to sign new contracts / service agreements, and they would give us the same identical speech. You know, we'll see you weekly. We'll be looking for housing weekly. You'll get weekly reports, weekly emails, lots of contact. No contact, ghosted. And this cycle went on for a period of 2 to 3 years, and there were absolutely 0 services provided whatsoever. And I made multiple calls to try to get answers, only to be met with no answers, no returned phone calls, no returned emails, nothing. Or I was told that person is gone.
Wow. Listen, no matter what happens, and we'll have to wait and see, there's no way you could possibly believe, with all the information coming out, that there weren't people, government officials, who didn't know what was going on. This is far beyond just willful ignorance. We're talking about corruption now. We're talking about criminal acts of allowing things to go by. We've seen the connections already where they receive donations. They're rubbing shoulders, shaking hands with people who end up getting arrested and charged in these fraud scams. Whether or not they will actually face the consequences of their actions, we will have to wait and see. But it's impossible to believe that a fraud of this magnitude was able to exist for this long, and no one in a position of power was aware or knew what was going on. Not when you have people who, like this woman right here, who's trying to protect her identity because she still works for the state, were sending it up the ladder, doing what she was supposed to do when she noticed irregularities, and was basically told, hey, don't worry about it. Matter of fact, that didn't even happen. While at the same time, you got Ilhan Omar, who's continuously making the rounds, trying to change and shift the narrative in order to keep everybody distracted, basically. But let me know your thoughts. Drop your comments down below. You know I appreciate when you guys chime in. Don't forget, you enjoy any part of the content, smash that thumbs up. For more, subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.